Following the end of the Mexican-American War, which occurred from 1846 to 1848, tens of thousands of migrant workers from Mexico began arriving in the United States. In many cases, they freely moved across the border for temporary jobs and then returned home. This caused many Americans to begin to be concerned about border security. Eventually, America put into effect the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This act, which banned the employment of Chinese workers, was the first major attempt to restrict the flow of workers coming to the U.S. At a certain point, the restrictions led to a smaller labor supply. This caused the U.S. to implement its first guest worker program in 1917. Growers argued that World War I had created an agricultural crisis, better known as a labor shortage. Thus, the first guest worker program was created, allowing more than 70,000 Mexican workers into the United States to work in sugar beet and cotton fields. In 1921, the program ended, and during the Great Depression, these workers who were originally invited to fill a void came to be seen as a threat to American workers. Many were sent back to Mexico. More than 500,000 people are forcibly deported, including some U.S. citizens. After World War II, however, in 1942, the Bracero program was established, aiming to fill shortages in agricultural labor resulting from World War II. The U.S. State Department and the Mexican government reached an agreement to create a program which was designed to bring in a few hundred experienced workers to harvest our sugar beets in California. On paper, the agreement was good for workers. However, in 1952, the Immigration and Nationality Act was put into effect, formally creating the H-2A visa, which allowed for non-immigrant short-term labor. Then, in 1986, the Immigration Reform and Control Act divided the H-2 program into two categories: H-2A visas for agricultural workers with no annual numerical limits, and the H-2B visa for non-agricultural workers. After 2 decades of little change to the guest worker program, the Bush administration revised the program in 2008 by decreasing government oversight, reducing wages, and eliminating many labor protections. In February of 2010, Obama returned the H-2A to its previous structure. The administration announced that it would suspend the Bush administration's changes to the guest worker program, restoring most of the terms of the program to its earlier form. There are only 3 main steps when applying for an H-2A temporary work visa. However, each of these steps have extremely tedious and detailed applications, which create significant confusion for applicants and employers. To start, both employers and workers must fill out a temporary work certification through the Department of Labor immediately after they must request an H-2A specific classification from the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. After completing Step 1, applicants must then also submit an I-129 form to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, including their approved temporary work visas and requested H-2A classification as evidence of completion. To finalize the application process, workers must apply for an official visa and/or permission to enter the United States from the Department of the State. This requires workers to drive to the nearest U.S. embassy located in their country to apply for this final H-2A visa. While the U.S. has been known to respond in a timely manner to applications, completing the process from start to finish takes months of planning in advance as well, and is costly to employers, roughly $400 to $1,500 just to complete the application process. H-2A visa enrollment stood at 65,000 in 2002, a large increase from just 31,000 in 2002, while the number of undocumented workers last year was estimated at 525,000, according to the World Agricultural, Economic, and Environmental Services. Employers have to pay fees and file applications with multiple state agencies and departments for months in advance of hiring and endure long waiting times for approval, sometimes barely in time for harvest season. In 2012, employers claimed nearly $170 million of monetary loss across the nation because they could not get the workers when they needed them. H-2A visa applications have seen a large increase in denials from 2007 to 2011. From 2009 to 2010, in the fourth quarter of the year, denial went from 6% to 12%, decreasing available workers even more. Excessive deficiency notices and requests for evidence caused serious delays. 72% of growers reported that workers arrived after the date of need, on average about 22 days late. Amongst the 7 different categories of reasons to give a deficiency notice, small errors or inconsistencies accounted for nearly 60%. Because the process of obtaining an H-2A visa is so difficult, it indirectly promotes people to come across the border illegally. This is because the waiting period is so long and people are frequently denied for common mistakes. Regardless, the people from Mexico seeking a better life will usually do whatever it takes to work here. That is why they come across illegally, risking their lives so that they may make enough money one day to provide for their families back in Mexico. The extensive applications and numerous hurdles to obtain an H-2A for a worker and employer make the system undesirable for many. Minimizing the application process to one single application through one office would greatly improve the speed and ease of the H-2 visa. Delays in the H-2 visa worker causes many problems for farmers here in the United States. Each season, there are tons of crops that need to be harvested, and without sufficient workers, many crops go unpicked. Carlos Castaneda, a farmer in Southern California, says that some farmers have run out of options and canceled their H-2A visa applications or chosen not to plant certain crops. There are about 1 million undocumented farm workers in the United States, and only 30,000 workers on the H-2A visa. Streamlining the process would eventually switch those numbers where most of the immigrants are coming in on an H-2A visa. Workers also can only work for one employer. They have no path to citizenship with it and they cannot vote, which also decreases the number of workers applying for it. H-2A workers are also paid very little and cannot unionize, which leads to poor working conditions. The way that the H-2A visa is set up right now is not only bad for immigrant workers, but also for Americans trying to work in agriculture. Farmers can pay the immigrant workers very little, but have to pay Americans minimum wage. Therefore, it is difficult to find Americans jobs, and when they do, the farmers are like to make their working conditions poor so that they have to quit. American farmers and ranchers need a reliable, skilled workforce to stay profitable in a competitive market. Farm work is challenging because it's often seasonal and transitory. There's a labor shortage in this country because many Americans are not willing to work in extreme weather conditions doing hard labor. Without adequate labor, agriculture will go away and the United States will be solely dependent on importing goods from other countries. The bottom line is that we can't be competitive without foreign-born labor force. All farm labor can't be replaced by mechanization either, because of jobs like tending livestock and pruning or picking fresh fruit, which require a human touch. Where American workers are unwilling or unavailable, workers from other countries have stepped in. Some agricultural industries rely on year-round labor. Year-round labor industries creates a need for permanent residency. To add another point, Congress needs to pass an immigration reform that addresses agriculture's current experienced workforce and creates a new flexible guest worker program. Instability in the agricultural workforce places our food supply at risk. Increasing immigration enforcement without also reforming our worker visa program will cost Americans $60 billion in agricultural production because of money, time, energy, labor, and ultimately food and fiber costs. Many current policies are quote-unquote band-aid solutions that only temporarily solve the problem. The implementation of a number of long-term solutions, such as expedited path to citizenship, utilization of unemployed Americans, and amnesty, will ultimately be the solution to the American immigration problem. Many argue that the H-2A visa in its current form is insufficiently flexible, entails burdensome regulations, and poses potential litigation expenses for employers. Proponents of this view support extensive changes, particularly moving from labor certification to labor attestation, that they believe would increase the speed with which employers could hire foreign workers and reduce the government's role in delaying or blocking such employment.